Hello my sweet friends and welcome to Kinda Shabby. My name is Becky and I am so glad you stopped by. Today we are going to be making these gorgeous shabby chic bracelets. The tutorial will include some embroidery as well as a beaded blanket stitch. Well, there is lots of fun in store today, so let's get these projects started. So before we get started, we're going to take a closer look at the three different styles that we're going to be making today. These two are actually made the same way. We've got a double ruffle down the middle with some trim, pretty little flower and a button, and we also have some really pretty lace trim, chiffon ties, and then the back is just some cotton muslin fabric. And then this one is made the same way. We've got two ruffles down the front. We've got some trim, pretty little button there, little lace on the outside. And then I used the same fabric to make the ties on that. And then that's just backed with some white cotton muslin. This little beauty here is all embroidered. I will show you how to make all of those little embroidery stitches there. And then we've got the jewelry crimps on the end, and we've got this one backed with a lace panel, so that way none of our stitching is going to show. Now this one is a little different because we are going to have some of that stitching to show. But this is gorgeous velvet ribbon, a little tulle ruffle, some gorgeous lace. This was actually one of my old earrings that I don't wear anymore, that I just took the backer off of, and then I made sure that I sanitized that in some rubbing alcohol. And then I have some beautiful crinkled seam binding for the ties. I did a beaded blanket stitch. We're going to do that. And then I closed this seam here with some thread that matched the lace, and this again is just a beautiful natural cotton muslin fabric. So we've got lots of pretty bracelets that we're going to be making today, and we are going to be starting with this design here first. To save time in the video, I am going to go ahead and have my pieces pre-cut. My base piece that I'm starting off with is just a nice natural colored canvas, 2 inches wide, 7.5 inches long. My backing piece is a natural cotton muslin, also 2 inches wide and 7.5 inches long. And I always just snip and rip my pieces because I love those kind of frayed, shabby chic edges. My larger ruffle I am making out of this beautiful fabric, and then the smaller ruffle will be made out of this chiffon. And I snipped and ripped each of those pieces. This one is 1.5 inches wide and 14 inches long, and this one is 3/4 inches wide and 14 inches long. So to make my double ruffle, I place the smaller piece of fabric right down the middle of the larger piece of fabric, and I'm going to go over to my sewing machine and sew a basting stitch to be able to gather this. But you could also use heavy-duty thread and a needle, and you could put your basting stitch or your running stitch down the center and gather that up, whichever way you prefer. After stitching, it actually tries to ruffle on its own, so I tie a knot in this end, then I grab the top thread and just gently pull this, walking that fabric all the way down to the end here where the knot is, until I get a nice, beautiful little ruffle. And now I'm going to pin this end in the middle of my canvas base here. That way I can adjust my gathers to actually fit that section. And so now I'm going to go back to my machine and I'm going to stitch this down to the base, going over those previous stitches, just making sure that all of those beautiful ruffles get locked into place. And now I'm just going to take my thumbs and kind of just fluff up that top ruffle. And now we need to trim down the middle. So I like this pretty natural trim. That's going to be pretty down the front of that one. I like this crocheted scalloped trim. I'll be stitching that up underneath there. That is just dreamy. And I'm going to fold this in half just to make sure that the middle of that trim falls at the halfway mark. This makes it more appealing when your little scallops are lined up to the middle of your bracelet here. This ruffle is overlapping the top of that, so when I go to stitch this down, it's going to hide all of that stitching. And now that I have everything pinned into place, I am going to go back to the sewing machine. First, I'm going to stitch down my center trim here. Then I'm going to hold this ruffle out of the way and stitch close to this edge right here on my sewing machine. And we have all of that stitched down. And now before we add our ties and our backer, I am going to stitch a button on the front here. And I have doubled my thread over and knotted it at the end. And again, I'm going to fold this in half, bring up my needle there, and my button is nice and centered. And then I'm just going to hand stitch this on, and I will sew over this button a couple of times because I again want to make sure that everything is going to stay down. So I've put that through the button a couple times, and now I'm just going to come back here, make a couple of knots, tie it off, and clip my threads. And now I have 2 strips of the same fabric that we made our ruffle down the center, and these are 1 inch wide and 12 inches long. Place it and center it up, leaving a couple of inches at the top, and I'm going to fold it over and fold it over again, just like that. So it adds a little bit of reinforcement to this area of the ties. And now I'm going to take my backer, and these edges here, I want to line up with these edges of our canvas base right here. I'm going to pin that, using back stitches at each end to secure those stitches, and I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam right here. So I have that stitched down. I do double stitch that. I don't want any of that coming apart. So then when we turn all of this right side out, we've got our backer that's going to cover up all of that stitching, and then we have our pretty little tie. Isn't that gorgeous? And again, I'm going to lay that, fold it down, and fold it down again. You want to make sure your ties are out of the way. And then when I bring this up, I'm again aligning these corners with the corners of our backer, pin it into place, and go and stitch my 1/4 inch seam. So now that we have both of these sides stitched down, turn it right side out just to make sure everything looks good. That looks great. I'm going to turn it inside out again, and I'm going to trim down some of this thickness. And I trim off just that little bit there. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Let's turn it right side out again. Just smooth that out. I'm going to go back to my sewing machine. I'll hold this ruffle back, and I'm going to stitch down this line again to secure these 2 pieces together. And with those edges stitched down, the stitching of our little bracelet here is complete. I do not want all of this crocheted trim becoming unraveled over time. So I'm going to trim off those little threads there, and I'm going to apply some fray block. Now, if you don't have fray block, you could also use fabric tack. You just want something that is going to prevent that from unraveling. So I'm literally just applying a tiny amount to those edges there. And with all of our edges finished, that completes this beautiful bracelet. This style is really beautiful. It's very quick and easy to do, and there is no limit to the different combinations of fabrics and trims and buttons and any kind of beautiful accessories that you could imagine. Well, now let's go ahead and move on to our next style of bracelet. For our next style, we're going to be doing our embroidered velvet ribbon. I'm also using embroidery floss from this kit right here. I also got this on Amazon, so I will have these two linked in the description box for you below. I purchased these beautiful frayed edge velvet ribbons at Hobby Lobby. This one is called Blush, and it is just a nice, soft, little peachy beige color. And this one, oh, look at that. This one is called Plum Berry. And our ribbon piece here is 1.5 inches wide, and this one is cut to 6 inches long because we're not stitching anything on the ends. We're simply finishing the ends off with our jewelry clamps. And I've chosen these colors, the cream, a nice little soft sagey green, and the gold. And I think that they will look absolutely stunning on that plum colored velvet ribbon. I like to use these little pins to draw my design on, and I picked this up from Walmart. Now for my darker fabrics, this is not going to show up. So I use just a bistro chalk marker, and the chalk also can be wiped away and it's not going to show up behind your stitching. So I'm going to fold my ribbon in half, and I'm just going to make a little dot in the middle. Then I'm going to draw a circle. And then I'm going to draw another circle over here and another circle down here. They don't have to be perfect because all of that is going to be covered up with stitching. And then I just draw a little wavy line, and same thing over here. That's how I start my pattern. And then for my circles, I'm going to draw 5 spokes in there. We're going to make a wagon wheel. So we've got our basic pattern down, and now all we need to do is start our stitching. I'm going to make all 3 of my flowers this cream color. So I'm going to pull off about an 18-inch long section, and your embroidery floss is actually 6 separate pieces of thread. I'm going to be stitching with 3 strands of my floss here. And it's easier if you use a needle threader. Just pop that through the eye of your needle, put your thread through that, and then pull it through. And then we're going to tie several knots in the end of our thread here. I'm going to start with my smaller flower over here, and I'm going to come up on the edge of one of my spokes and down in the middle. So I have one of the spokes, and we're just going to stitch all of our spokes. And you don't want to pull too tightly, you don't want to bunch your fabric. And that's what we have so far. And now the fun part. Bring your needle up very close to the center next to one of your spokes. Pull your needle through, and you're going to bring it over this thread, but you're going to go under the next one. And you're going to go over this thread and then under the next one. So you're just alternating, going over and under each of your threads. Then you're going to go over this one and under the next one. And you're just going to keep following that same process. When you come underneath one of your spokes, you're going to skip that and cross over that one, and then you're going to come under the next one. And this is called a woven wheel. It's also called a woven rose, and it just makes the prettiest little flower when it's all finished. You literally just keep going over and under, around and around and around, and those threads start stacking on top of each other and building up until you get that sweet little rose. And you will do that same process to all 3 of your flowers. The only exception is this large one here in the middle. I will use all 6 strands instead of 3 when I do the big flower. My little rose looks so cute. My last stitch, I came under my last spoke here. I'm just going to take this to the back and pull it through. Make a knot. And I'm going to make a couple of knots in the back here. And I'm going to clip my thread. And so we have one little flower done. Now that I have the larger flower going, so you can see this thread is coming up underneath this spoke. So I'm going to go over and past that one, and we're going to come up under this one. Now we're going to skip and go over this one, and we're going to come under this one. Just like that. So now that we have finished our beautiful little woven roses, we're going to do a stem stitch along our vine here. Again, 3 strands of my floss and tied several knots at the end. I want it close to the edge, but not right on the edge because I don't want that stitching to fall out. Advance your needle and bring it down. And that's not going to be a very large stitch at all. So you've got one little stitch there. And I'm going to come to the left side at the halfway point between this stitch here. And we're going to pull this up. And again, a tiny stitch forward. Come up to the left, halfway between that stitch. Advance our needle just a little bit to the left, halfway between the stitches. So it's starting to form like a little twist there. And you're just going to do that same stitch all the way down your vine. So I finished stitching my vine, and then on this side I added a French knot in that gold thread to the middle of this flower. Kind of hard to see, but I also did a whip stitch of some gold thread in here and added my little leaves. So we're going to come over here to this side and do the same thing. Now for my whipped stitch that I did on the vine, that gold thread has multiple little strands in there. I pulled out 4 of those to do my whip stitch, and I tied multiple knots at the bottom to make sure it isn't going to pull through my fabric. And you're going to come up at the bottom where you've started your vine and pull your thread through. And now you're just going to take your needle, go underneath those stitches that you made on your vine, and we're just going to wrap that vine with our gold thread. And then you come up again Bring your needle up underneath your green thread for your vine. And that's all we're going to do, is just keep coming up underneath that thread. And it starts to wrap that vine with the gold thread. So this is our whipped stem stitch. With our gold whipped stitch complete there, we're going to come back and add a French knot to the middle of this little woven rose. I just used the entire strand of that floss as it is. And you're going to bring your needle up in the middle of your rose. And you're going to take your floss and wrap your needle twice. And you want to kind of keep tension with your thumb with that thread, and you're going to come back very close to where you brought your needle up. You're going to put it right back down and pull this through. And that forms our French knot in the middle of our little flower. Now I'm going to tie this off, and we're going to come over here and do French knots in the middle of this flower as well. So again, we're going to come up in the middle of our flower here, wrap our floss around our needle twice, and make sure we've got good tension with our thumb. Come back down very close to where we came up and pull that through. Very pretty. I'm actually going to add a couple more knots to the middle because this is a pretty big flower. So I'm going to bring my needle up near that. Wrap my floss around my needle twice. Hold a little bit of tension with my thumb. Bring it back down close to where I brought it up and pull that through. I think that's just gorgeous. I love it. I'm going to tie this off, and then we're going to come back and put our leaves on the other side of our vine. Now when I make my little leaves, I don't draw them out. I just decide I'm going to put one right here, put another one here, and one right there. So I'm going to bring my needle up close to my vine and just advance my needle forward to make a little stitch. Just one little straight stitch like that. Then I'm going to come back in that same hole. Come to one side just a little bit down. Come back to that same hole. Go to the opposite side. Bring my needle down just a little bit from that highest stitch. Again, same hole. Back to the other side, just a little further down from the previous stitch. And then we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Then I go back to the original hole again and make one more stitch right back to the longest stitch to go over everything. And there's our little leaf. And I tie off after every leaf. I don't like long threads. Now because I have used all of these French knots in the middle of these little flowers instead of the little pearls like I did on this one, I've decided I am not going to do all of the French knots around the background, and I've added these little leaves instead. So I'm going to come over here to this last flower and show you how I did that. I'm going to come up close to my flower, and then I'm going to go down maybe a 1/4 inch away from that. There's a little loop right here. I'm going to bring my needle up where I want my leaf to end. I'm going to catch that loop with my needle, and then I'm going to take my needle down over the top of that thread so it catches it just like that. You could fill in the entire leaf with more stitches, but I only make 2 to 3 stitches. So I'll come up on the side to the top here, And again over here. And we've got that little leaf. Now, because of all of the stitching that we do have on the front, we have lots and lots and lots of knots. I am going to take my art glitter glue, and this does dry clear, and I'm going to place glue, just a tiny little dot of that glue, on each of these knots. I don't want the chance of any of this getting snagged or coming apart over time. And now that all of that is glued down and that glue is dry, I'm going to use this lace as a backer, just like I did on this piece here. So I'm going to cut this just a slight bit longer than I need it. Right side facing up, and the wrong side is going to go down on top of that. So then both of my right sides will be facing up. Oh, that is just so pretty. I love that. And I'm going to be using my Fabri-Tac glue, and I'm just going to work in small sections and run this glue down the lace and also on the body of my ribbon here. And I'm going to press that into place and really squish that down. So now that the glue is dry, we're going to cut off this excess lace on the end. And I'm going to take one of these little crimps here and place it over the edge and make sure that it is in the middle. And then I'm going to take the flat portion of my little jewelry pliers here, and I'm going to slightly crimp down in the middle. And then I'm going to finish crimping all of that down. And then I'm going to do that same process to the other side. And in this little kit, there are several different colors. And because I had used the gold thread, I did choose to use the gold crimps. This little thing that I'm wearing on my thumb here comes in this assortment here that has your little lobster clasps and different sizes of your jump rings. Now these pieces here, I actually took off of the end of this necklace. So I'm going to insert one of my jump rings. I'm also going to put the lobster clasp on there. Then this little gadget has these little grooves in there, and you put the jump ring inside one of those grooves, and you use your jewelry pliers to wiggle and close that jump ring. So we have that side on, and then we're going to come over here to this side and insert our ring. Put the ring inside one of those grooves and wiggle to close your jump ring. I think this one might be my favorite. I love how that one turned out. So now this is our last style that we're going to make. And this bracelet consisted of a velvet ribbon, a tulle ruffle, and a lace panel. I also had just a gorgeous toile fabric that had a beautiful blue that I wanted to show up through there, and jewelry detail, beautiful beaded blanket stitch, and then finished off with a natural cotton muslin. And it also has these gorgeous crinkled seam binding as ties. Now for this one, my base is going to be a beautiful soft white. The backer will be white cotton muslin. And both of these pieces are 2.5 inches wide and 7 inches long. This beautiful soft pink velvet ribbon, and this gorgeous lace panel here, and these beautiful crinkled seam binding will be the tie on this bracelet. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my fabric right sides together. I'm going to stitch just a small 1/4 inch seam down one side of my pieces here. And with that tiny little seam stitched there, I'm going to open it up, get that finger pressed open. I'm going to turn it right side out, and then I'm going to take my ribbon and lay that right up against the seam, and I'm going to stitch this right there. So I have that stitched close to the seam there, and then I'm going to take the lace, tuck it up underneath that little velvet ribbon, and I'm going to fold it in half and make sure that the center of my bracelet is centered on the design. Open this back up, pin this into place, and I'm going to stitch right down this area here to secure that to my front. And now we have that stitched on there. And now I'm taking my tulle, and this is 2 inches wide and 14 inches long. And I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to stitch near the edge with a basting stitch, and then I'm going to gather that into my ruffle. I have tied the threads on one end in several knots so it's not going to come loose. I'm going to grab one of the threads at the other end, and I'm just going to pull gently, and that's going to make my little ruffle. And I'm going to tuck it underneath here at one end and pin that into place, and then that way I can adjust the gathers to make sure they're evenly spaced across the front of my bracelet. And now I'm going to go and stitch very close to the edge of this ribbon to secure our little ruffle in place. And our little ruffle looks really, really cute on there. And now I'm going to take these pieces here. So I think that having these on here is going to be just absolutely beautiful. And I'm going to get those stitched on. I think I'm going to go with the silver to match the jewelry. And so I'm going to separate out about 5 of these. And then with a lot of knots at the end, I'm going to come up underneath and then just begin stitching this onto my ribbon, making sure that it's in the middle. And so I usually run through the openings there about 3 or 4 times to secure that into place. So I have all of our little pretty embellishments sewn on, and I also used my glue once again on all the knots to keep everything in place. Now I'm going to fold and finger press a seam allowance, and now I'm going to take my crinkled seam binding and I'm going to cut that at 10 inches, and I'm going to cut 2 of these. And I have 2 ladies on Etsy that I purchased my crinkled seam binding from, and I'll be sure to leave a link to their shops below for you. So I'm going to fold it down and then fold it on itself again, and I'm going to line it up in the middle of the bottom of my velvet ribbon and my lace panel here. And then I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam right along here. And so that is what these look like when they are stitched. And before I trim anything, I always flip it right side out just to make sure it looks like I think it's going to. Okay, looks good so far. So I'm going to turn it back this way. I'm going to clip my corners just a little bit, and that's going to eliminate some of the bulk when we turn this back right side out. I'm going to clip off this excess, and we're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to turn this right side out. And then this time I'm going to make sure that I push out those corners really well. That is so pretty. Oh, I love it. And I'm going to take my frayed check once again on these edges of the lace here so they do not start fraying, and we are almost finished with this bracelet. So for my stitches, I am using 3 strands of a pale pink embroidery floss, and then I'm using these little silver beads, and I picked up my beads from Hobby Lobby. I like to buy them when they are 50% off, and I'm going to be stitching across the top here from the right toward the left. We have not closed this seam here up yet, and again with plenty of knots at the end, and you're going to bring it up at the corner because that is going to hide your knot. And then you take your bead and you put it all the way down to your fabric, and I want it to rest on the top just like that. I want my stitch width to be about the width of my bead. And we're going to pull this through, and you can see there's a little loop there. And our needle is just going to come through that loop. And then we're just going to kind of pull and snug that up. And we're going to add another bead. Take it all the way down to our ribbon. Make our next stitch the width of our bead and insert your needle straight. And we're going to pull it through. We've got a little loop here, so we're going to put our needle through that loop. And kind of move your thread to snug up your bead. And we'll do one more of these just to make sure that you have the technique down. Add your bead, take it all the way down to your ribbon, make your stitch about the width of your bead, pull through, and you have a loop here. So you're going to insert your needle through that loop and then kind of tug on your threads to snug it up. And then all of our beads are going to sit nicely along the top here. So I'm going to follow that same process all the way down the top of my ribbon here. And now that we have come to the end of our stitching, and I'm going to really snug up that last stitch, make a small knot on the back, just very small. Now we're going to take our thread down through the corner. And now I can make my stitches on the seam here. So you just make a couple of knots and tie off and clip your threads, and then turn this back right side out again. And now the last thing that we're going to do is overcast stitch to close up the backing here. And I'm going to be using white embroidery floss to do that stitching. And I will be using 3 strands of my embroidery floss. For this stitch, we're actually going to go left to right. And this is what we want the stitch to look like. We're coming up here and we're going to pull up our thread so we hide our knots. We're going to come and grab just a little bite of that pink fabric and a little bite of that white fabric. And we're going to do the same thing, just a little bite of each fabric. And I know it's hard to see on the white, that's why I wanted to show you this as well. And I'm going to do that same thing all the way down to secure and close that seam. And with all of our stitching completed, I made just a tiny little knot right here at the end. Then I'm going to put my needle back through this way. I'm going to pull that just a little tight right there so it bunches up. Then I'm going to clip that thread so it leaves a long tail hidden there. And that is the end of this bracelet. And I just think our bracelets here are just so beautiful. And now all I need to do is give you a closer look at how gorgeous all of our lovely little shabby chic bracelets turned out. Thank you so much for joining me today. It has been my pleasure to craft with you. Please subscribe for more kinda shabby but always chic crafty inspirations. And until next time, my sweet friends, be blessed.